Hi there. Welcome to Adventure. You know, mountain peaks have been a source of excitement and superstitious fear for thousands of years. It's only in the last 200 years that men have learned to regard these towering peaks as a challenge. One of the hardy adventurers who has accepted this challenge is a retired businessman by the name of John D. Graham. And we're going along with him on one of his most dramatic expeditions to the top of Mount McKinley. To many people, even today, these frozen regions are the breeding grounds of superstition and no place for mortal men, which only added zest to the challenge for Mr. Graham. We'll have a chance to talk to him later in the program. But what makes his exploit doubly remarkable is the fact that he was 65 years of age when he made this dangerous climb. Because you see, McKinley isn't just the highest point in North America, it's one of the world's greatest mountains. And climbing it calls for all the skill and the daring and determination that makes a true adventure. Until 1959, Mount Whitney was the highest mountain in the United States. You can ride a horse all the way to the top, almost 14,500 feet up. Mount Whitney is located in California's high Sierras. It's hard to beat the scenery up there. The hikers and campers who visit the upper valleys every year say there's probably no more beautiful mountain region in the whole country. But to a real mountaineer, Whitney is an invitation to a pleasant hike, not a challenge to adventure, which is why, for years, Americans had to go abroad for really dramatic high-altitude climbing. Abroad to the Alps, for instance, and the Matterhorn, the most famous mountain in the whole world. The Matterhorn is just one of many mountains John D. Graham has climbed in his career. It's not particularly high, not quite 14,800 feet, but there's something about it that has always caught the imagination. As recently as the 1860s, Swiss and Italian peasants who lived in the surrounding valleys believed that ghosts and demons lived in a ruined city on the mountain's summit. A few attempts had been made to climb it, but they were all such total failures, even experienced climbers were coming to believe that the Matterhorn wasn't only unconquered, it was unconquerable. Since those days, it's become one of the most climbed mountains in the Alps. But that doesn't seem to diminish the lure it holds out to climbers. Shaped a bit like a huge crooked pyramid, it has everything it takes to fascinate the mountaineer and terrify the tenderfoot. For Jack Graham, the lure of the Matterhorn became irresistible. He has climbed it 5 times. Here is a sport that calls for utmost nerve, not to mention coordination and sheer muscular strength, no matter what your age is. Jack made 2 complete traverses of the Matterhorn on 3 different ridges in 2 days at the age of 61. On top of the Matterhorn, from here on the morning of July 15, 1865, 7 men looked out over this view, the first men ever to do so. But of the 7, only 3 lived to tell about it. On the way down, 4 of them fell 4,000 feet. A horrible price to pay for victory over a mountain. But it's a price that men like Jack Graham are willing to risk. Are the Rwenzori Africa's fabled mountains of the moon. Jack Graham tackles them at the age of 63. Altogether, the Rwenzori have 10 peaks of more than 16,000 feet. Jack's plan is to be the first man ever to climb all 10 of them, which he does. But this spectacular feat is only the start of his African campaign. Next comes Mawenzie and Kibo, the twin peaks of Kilimanjaro. Then there are others, until he has become the first man to climb every African peak over 16,000 feet high, all 15 of them. With Alaska's admission to the Union in 1959, Americans now have a tremendous challenge within their own borders, Mount McKinley. Located in a 150-mile-long mountain range in south-central Alaska, Mount McKinley is one of the greatest single mountains anywhere on Earth, probably the coldest. The temperature hits 100 degrees below zero. It is also the most northern of the world's great mountains, and another challenge Jack Graham can't turn down. Starting from Anchorage, Jack's McKinley expedition arrives at a frontier-type Alaskan village called Talkeetna on April 22nd. The next step will be an airlift to Kahiltna Glacier on McKinley's slopes. The first supplies for Camp 1 are loaded aboard the Super Cub plane. The members of the party will have to be flown in one at a time, Jack going first. The pilot is Don Sheldon, the most famous bush pilot in Alaska. The approaches to McKinley are familiar ground to Don Sheldon. He's not only an expert mountain flyer, he specializes in doing the impossible. In 1960, for example, he landed his little plane at over 14,000 feet to rescue a woman climber who lay dying from lack of oxygen. In 1961, at this same high elevation, he picked up 2 members of a successful Canadian expedition whose feet were badly frostbitten. At those altitudes, a small plane becomes a tricky vehicle to handle. The landing is routine. But soon after he takes off again, a storm blows up, leaving Jack stranded on Kahiltna Glacier. The boots, incidentally, are Army double-insulated rubber boots, sometimes called Korean boots. The crampons are for gripping icy surfaces. This is no small storm. It turns out to be a 5-day blizzard, completely cut off up here. Very small items can mean the difference between life and death for Jack Graham. The number of matches he has left, for instance, are carefully counted. The tent is staked down with ice axes, ski poles, and snowshoes. The winds hit 50 miles an hour. The temperatures are well below freezing. Involved in a classic battle between man and the elements, Jack can do nothing but go about the simple, everyday things that keep a man alive and wait for the blizzard to die down. He has no way of knowing how long it will be. Every day, there are 2 feet of snow to be shoveled away from around the tent. Every day for 5 days. And then, finally, it clears. His supplies have dwindled to nothing, but Jack's alive, and now Don Sheldon can fly the others in. When the other men arrive, they leave Jack's first camp and establish their base camp near the head of Kahiltna Glacier at 10,000 feet. Altogether, the climbing party consists of 4 men. This is Dick Sternmark, a McKinley National Park ranger. In the middle is Felix Julen, a highly experienced mountaineer who is also a Swiss Army captain. Adolf Riest is behind the camera taking these pictures, so we can't see him, but he's another veteran. He climbed Mount Everest with the Swiss expedition of 1956 and accompanied Jack's second expedition to the Rwenzori in Africa. Jack, of course, is the party's leader, and he knows he's working with a team of experts that would be hard to beat. On Mount McKinley in Alaska, now begins the job of relaying supplies to higher camps. You don't try to conquer a mountain like McKinley by rushing at it headlong. There's more than supplies to consider. There's the business of growing accustomed to the altitude, of learning to carry heavy packs up steep, icy slopes in thin air in continuous sub-freezing weather. An expedition like this has to be carefully pre-planned. The first move from base camp is to establish a cache of supplies opposite the West Buttress at 12,000 feet. With the first cache established, Jack and the boys begin moving supplies from base camp up to the next camp. It's to be situated at a place called Windy Corner at an altitude of 12,500 feet. Supplies left at the cache are also moved up the mountain to the new campsite. To give you some idea of the sheer physical strength needed for this kind of climbing, that pack weighs 60 pounds. You need powerful lungs, too. At this altitude, the oxygen's already getting thin. It takes 2 trips to each camp to get everything moved up the mountain. After taking all extra supplies and equipment to the next highest camp, they come back down to spend the night at the lower elevation. This helps them to get better acclimatized. Then the following day, they break camp and move on up to the higher site. The big question now is, will the weather hold good? Only 200 miles from the Arctic Circle, Mount McKinley is famous for sudden, violent storms. The men who tackle Mighty Mac can expect the full range of hardship and excitement that always comes with true adventure. This is on the way up to the top of the continent. Jack Graham and his 3 partners are aiming for the 20,300-foot summit of Mount McKinley. It's only been known as McKinley since 1896. To the Indians of the region, it was Denali, the home of the sun. Some tribes called it Tralaika, others Doleka. When the Russians were here, they called it Bolshaya Gora. And all 3 names in 3 different languages mean the same thing, the Great One. This is Windy Corner, Jack Graham's Camp 4, but it's no place to be in anything less than perfect weather, because here, winds often reach 100 to 120 miles an hour. That's enough to rip a tent to shreds or blow it clear off the mountain. But the weather stays fair, for the time being at least. The expedition gets ready to move on, up to the next campsite. These little flags are trail markers. Stuck into the ice or snow every 300 feet, they'll help the men find their way back to camp in the event of a sudden storm. In the frozen wilderness of the Alaskan range, taking every precaution is the mark of of an expert. Leaving Camp 4 means leaving this supply of emergency rations. They were dumped here by the Air Force during a big rescue operation in 1960. They've come in very handy for Jack and the men, but from here on, they'll have to survive on what they can carry. The Indians and the Russians, who called McKinley the Great One, had the right idea. There are no great technical climbing problems. It's more a matter of endurance, of carrying heavy loads at high altitudes, of surviving terribly bitter cold, even in the bright sunshine. 20,300 feet isn't especially high. Nonetheless, McKinley is a great mountain, perhaps the greatest in the world, because the giants of the Himalayas and the Andes, though higher, usually rise from a high plateau. Mount Everest, for example, begins on a plateau already 16,000 feet high. But the great one, Mighty Mac, has its base below 2,000 feet and then soars all the way up, 3.5 miles straight up from base to peak, all in one cold, unbroken sweep of rock and ice. Camp 5, 14,200 feet high. Getting here has meant relaying 8 loads from Camp 4, everyone making 2 trips in a single day. Here we're almost as high as the summit of the Matterhorn we saw earlier. The next part of the journey lies up the West Buttress Ice Slope. A whole day is devoted to cutting a stairway. Screw pitons like this one are used to anchor 1,000 feet of 1/4-inch manila rope, which they leave on the ice slope for use of future expeditions. Between 15 and 16,000 feet up, this is what the phrase, "one step at a time," means. Felix Julen has to cut every step in the hard blue ice as the party moves slowly on toward its next objective. Slowly, ever so slowly. From the top of the ice slope, you can see the kind of view that's one of the special rewards of mountain climbing. High Camp, 17,200 feet. This is the last stop before the last big effort to reach the summit. The first try ends in failure. The weather closed in. The thermometer sunk to a minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The winds hit 50 miles an hour. Visibility was cut 30 feet. And for 2 days, the cameramen could take no films. And then, on May 11th, the weather cleared. Cleared enough for a second attempt. heavy packs now. No more camps to set up. This is the final lap. If they make it, it will be the 20th recorded climb of Mount McKinley's highest peak. Final climb toward McKinley's South Peak, the top of the North American continent. 20,320 feet at 40 degrees below zero. Another victory for Jack Graham, who has conquered Mount McKinley at the age of 65. The Alps, the Rwenzori, Kilimanjaro, and Mount Kenya, now the great one, Mighty Mac. Jack Graham has answered their challenge and won a fantastic total of 120 peaks over 14,000 feet high, an achievement for the record books of true adventure. That was a most fascinating story, I'm sure you'll agree, and now I'd like to have you meet in person the man who made the story for us, Mr. Jack Graham. Jack, I think our friends would like to know how you would compare Mount McKinley to other peaks throughout the world.
Well, Bill, Mount McKinley is the most northern of the world's great peaks. As it is located near the Arctic Circle, it is probably the coldest mountain in the world. It is also the highest mountain in the world from the base to the summit, rising from a low area of around 2,000 feet to over 20,000 feet in elevation.
It's a spectacular sight to see it the first time, isn't it, Jack?
Yes, it is, Bill.
Jack, I know there's a lot of preparation in mountain climbing. Can you describe what it's like to prepare for a really difficult climb like McKinley?
Well, Bill, it took me almost a year to organize my expedition. The greatest difficulty was finding qualified climbing companions. There are many mountain climbers in this country, but very few who have climbed over 20,000 feet. It is not only necessary to have experienced climbers, but it is very helpful to have men who can carry heavy loads. Climbing the high peaks in other parts of the world, porters and Sherpas carry the heavy loads. But on McKinley, we had to carry them. It is also necessary to go in training to get in the best physical condition.
Well, Jack, for a man 65 years of age, you certainly were in great physical condition. But is it really necessary to have all that equipment that we saw?
Yes, it is, Bill. As McKinley is located in a frigid wilderness area, it is very important to have all the necessary equipment, clothing, and food for this climb. If you should fail to bring just one item of equipment, it could cause a tragedy or failure of the expedition.
Well, Jack, I can imagine it would be most unhappy to be standing up there at, it's above 20,000, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Suddenly find out that you didn't have your gloves or something like that, which could be very serious and really cause a tragedy. What you're saying then, I think, is that if people do want to go out mountain climbing, regardless of their age, they should have the right kind of equipment, right?
That's right, Bill.
Well, thank you very much, John D. Graham, for being on our show. And I want to thank you folks out there for sharing this adventure with us. Until we meet again, this is Bill Burrud saying, may all your adventures be happy ones.